Thank you, Aziz. Thank you so much. And yes, as was previously mentioned, I think the Sanid campaign is really welcome and timely. I do believe that those abuses have been taking place for a very, very long time. We've been talking about the UAE 94. This case is far from being new, but UAE have benefited from let's say less denunciation of such abuses taking place, or at least less knowledge and awareness on these abuses. And it's important that there is light shed on the cases. I'm sure we'll go back to that, but the Universal Periodic Review of the UAE is going to be held this year. COP28 is also going to be held in Dubai. So these will also bring about like opportunities to actually shed light on the situation of prisoners of conscience. And I also really want to commend Hamad and Jinan, who are both Emiratis living in exile. And I think, their work and their efforts, to try and shed light on the situation of some of their family members, friends, is really remarkable. So I also want to thank them for all their commitment and efforts that we're happy to try and support in any way we can. So yes, indeed, back to the state security apparatus. So as was mentioned previously, the state security apparatus is really at the core of most of the human rights abuses taking place that we've mentioned before, and they have really played a prominent role in cracking down on any form of peaceful dissent. So I will explain, but very briefly, kind of the legal framework surrounding the state security apparatus and why it's problematic. So first of all, I will have to say that actually the SSA law has never been made public, and everything I will say is actually based on a copy of a version from 2003 that was obtained and published by the Emirates Detainees Advocacy Center. But so far, the law has not been made public by the authorities. So there are a number of issues with the state security apparatus law. So it essentially allows the SSA to operate without any institutional, judicial, or financial oversight. The SSA reports directly and solely to the president of the UAE. So there is no form of accountability, judicial oversight whatsoever. And as the SSA is also tasked with protecting state security, they're also allowed to conduct, exercise any activity to achieve such goals. The state security apparatus has very broad powers. So, for example, they can gather and analyze information, including on any so-called political activity that seeks to prejudice the state's safety, national unity, or governance system. They can also, and again, I quote, like, monitor social phenomena, whatever that means, and take any measures they see fit to try to limit that social phenomena. The president of the SSA can also place suspects in custody for up to 3 months before bringing these individuals before a judge, which obviously is in violation of international standards. And last but not least, the decisions of the SSA president are binding for all security apparatuses and other relevant bodies. So it essentially means that anything the state security does or say kind of supersedes all the other institutions. So, for example, they can go in a prison, establish an office there, overlook certain detainees. They can even establish themselves in government offices, even embassies and consulates. So they can really oversee all the different forms of like governmental offices, security institutions, and really have the kind of last say and overarching power over those. But so obviously the state security apparatus law is extremely problematic, but as was mentioned before, these like abuses such as enforced disappearances, torture, arbitrary detention, including beyond the completion of prison sentences, does not are perpetrated by state security forces, but they don't happen in a vacuum. And the state security apparatus has also been able to rely on many various different legislations to actually crack down on peaceful dissent. And this legislation is among some of the most repressive actually in the Middle East and North Africa region. Just to, again, like be very brief, but first of all, the counterterrorism law. So the state security is tasked with investigating crimes prescribed under this law. The problem, however, is that the definition of terrorism is extremely broad and vague. It does not necessarily include violent acts. And essentially, any form of peaceful dissent is actually considered an act of terrorism. And as was mentioned before, the law also provides for the establishment of so-called munasahah rehabilitation centers, which are supposedly established for to enlighten and reform persons convicted of terrorist offenses and that are deemed to that are considered to pose a so-called terrorist threat. The penal code also includes a number of highly restrictive provisions that also fall under the jurisdiction of the state security apparatus. But just to name a few, something like insulting the president of the UAE can get you in prison for anywhere from 15 to 25 years in prison. Same goes for anyone who insults, mocks, harms the reputation, prestige of the state, its flag, emblem, symbols, etc. And last but not least, the cybercrime law, which was adopted in 2012, so right after the beginning of the Arab Spring, also contains several provisions dealing with national security issues, and therefore, again, falling under the competence of the state security. So again, just to name one example, so unlawful content is actually defined as content that intends to harm the state's national security or sovereignty, or decreases public confidence in state authorities, whatever that means. And yeah, so I mean, we can really tell that these provisions are extremely broad and vague. And in addition to this, anyone under the cybercrime law, anyone who shares with any organization or association documents, reports, or data that may harm the state's interest, governmental agencies' reputation, prestige, or standing also faces prison. So essentially, anyone on the ground in the UAE who would be, I don't know, sharing some information with NGOs or with the United Nations, would be also at risk and could face arrest by the state security and prosecution later on. That's that for me. Thank you for listening.